This is Mission Control Houston, and welcome to Space Station Live. Looking down at the International Space Station Flight Control Room, the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. It's Wednesday, November 20th, 2013. The Orbit 2 team inside the room taking a quick breather while we wait to reacquire video and voice communication with the International Space Station. They'll be monitoring systems on board and controlling again from here in Houston. On board, the crew of Expedition 38, a six-man international crew led by Russian cosmonaut Oleg Kotov, two more Russian cosmonauts Sergei Ryazanskiy and Mikhail Turin on board, two NASA astronauts Mike Hopkins and Rick Mastracchio, and one Japanese astronaut Koichi Wakata. Fairly historic day for the International Space Station today, as it marks the 15th anniversary since the launch of the very first element Zarya, which was launched on a Proton rocket again 15 years ago in 1998 from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Zarya, the Russian word for sunrise, as the craft signaled the dawn of the new age of human spaceflight and a new age of international cooperation in space. So again, today we celebrate 15 years since the first launch of the first element that would eventually become the International Space Station. Meanwhile, today on board, Oleg Kotov, current commander on board of Expedition 38, doing a few experiment activities today, starting off earlier today with the Russian albedo experiment, which uses specialized cameras on board the station to measure the Earth's albedo, which is the amount of solar radiation that's reflected back naturally from the Earth's surface. That experiment hoping to eventually develop some ways to generate electrical power for the station from that reflected solar radiation. Aside from that work, Kotov also doing some repair on the Russian segment's water distribution and heating unit. Meanwhile, Sergei Ryazanskiy is continuing some work that he began yesterday, as he is replacing a number of fan units throughout the Russian segment with lower noise models to try and decrease some of the acoustic loads these crews are exposed to while inside the station. He'll also be doing some noise measurements throughout the Russian segment and sending those results down to the ground. NASA astronaut Mike Hopkins started off this day taking a few biological samples for the Pro-K experiment, which looks to track an astronaut's flight diet, which the one that he's on has a decreased ratio of protein to potassium, hoping that this is potentially one way to lead to decreased bone loss or loss of bone mineral material in the astronauts, as that is one of the serious things that they have to deal with while exposed to microgravity for long durations of time. Hopkins also setting up and running a few test runs on the capillary flow experiment, fluid physics experiment on board the station that investigates the force known as capillary flow, which is used to move fluids through various containers. Results from this study eventually hoping to improve the fluid delivery systems on board spacecraft in microgravity. Things like fuel delivery and also water systems for astronauts and also for various experiments on board. Hopkins also rounding out his day with a few health tests, checking out his vision, as again, vision another thing affected in these astronauts and cosmonauts' bodies while in that microgravity environment for long durations of time. Russian cosmonaut Mikhail Turin, right off the bat this morning, taking a few blood and saliva samples for a Russian biological experiment tracking crew health throughout his increment. He'll also have a pretty heavy day loaded down with maintenance on some of the ventilation systems throughout the Russian segment and also on the Russian Electron system, which is one of the oxygen generation systems on board, replenishing the astronaut's atmosphere on board the station. Meanwhile, NASA astronaut Rick Mastracchio taking a few samples of his own for the Human Research Facility on board the station, having a few maintenance and house cleaning tasks himself, cleaning out the ventilation system inside of the Destiny laboratory. And later on today, performing the quarterly inspection of one of the exercise devices on board the station, the treadmill, used to help combat the negative effects of weightlessness that have not only on the bone mineral, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, but also on the cardiovascular health of these astronauts. And then the final crew member on board, Koichi Wakata from the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, deployed the 4th CubeSat earlier this morning at 1:58 a.m. Central Time. He deployed 3 yesterday and that final one today out of the GEM airlock using the space station's portable satellite deployer mechanism. Again, all of that taking place in Kibo, the Japanese module on board the station. So Wakata was responsible for getting that together and deploying that satellite in conjunction with teams on the ground earlier today. Also, during his day, he'll be doing an eye exam and working on that capillary flow experiment with Hopkins. Again, a pretty historic day for the station, marking 15 years since the launch of the first Element Zarya from Baikonur, Kazakhstan.